As I have alluded to before, I'm of the belief that the original Star Wars films, as made by George Lucas, functionally serve as a framework of Buddhist mythology for modern Western civilization. Unintentionally, perhaps, but many are the pieces of art and literature that escape their author's intent upon contact with their audience. The Force is not presented as God. It is presented as the dualistic Tao, light and dark, yin and yang. It can only be accessed by raw awareness, not via a scientific process of knowledge, and it does not have a singular will. The Force is a balancing act between creation and destruction, order and chaos, two extremes in which balance can only be attained by walking the middle path. The depiction of the Force as a unifying soul field that inhabits and connects all objects and life forms is also extremely reminiscent of some of the beliefs found in the Japanese Shinto religion. Despite being labeled as knights during their journeyman years, the Jedi are far more comparable to Mahayana Buddhists, with elements derivative of Shaolin monks and samurai warrior poets. The focus on detachment from emotional fetters is the clearest and most obvious parallel, but let us examine the classic Jedi Code and see what else we may find. The Jedi Code is thus: there is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. In many ways, the Jedi Code provides an alternative to the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism that shifts the focus away from suffering mitigation and centers self-control and awareness. There is no emotion, there is peace ties directly to Buddhist teachings about practicing emotional detachment to reduce the mental harm and turmoil that becoming overly attached to people and things in a world that is defined by its impermanence can cause in people. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge, is a call to educate the self, to remain open to incorporating new knowledge and experiences into your understanding. Even bad, faulty, or misleading information can lead to learning and an increased awareness. Rejecting information out of hand without examination teaches no lessons, right or wrong. You have to be wrong in order to learn. One can also interpret this line as saying that even those whom you deem to be ignorant may be aware of something that you remain blind to by staying closed-minded to their point of view. There is no passion, there is serenity seems redundant in relation to there is no emotion, there is peace. But do not forget that synonyms actually do have different meanings. So let us look more closely at the differences between emotion and passion and peace and serenity. The definition of the word emotion, according to Google, is a natural instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstances, mood, or relationship with others. The definition of passion is a strong inclination or intense feeling towards something characterized by excitement, ardor, or zeal, often involving a high degree of personal value and commitment. The difference between emotion and passion, then, going by these definitions, would primarily be that emotion is instinctive and is often a reaction to external influences, while passion comes from an internal attachment to a strongly held cause or belief. Now, the definition of peace is a state of tranquility, freedom from disturbance, conflict, or war, encompassing personal, social, and international dimensions. And last but not least, the definition of serenity is the state of being calm, peaceful, and untroubled. And so the difference here is that peace is dependent on many external factors, and serenity is an internalized state of mind. And so, there is no emotion, there is peace, is about the reactions of the Jedi to external stimuli, guiding them to avoid giving into emotional reactions, and reducing points of friction between people that leads to harmful conflict. And then, there is no passion, there is serenity, is about the internal world, the avoidance of strong attachments, and the goal of finding an inner calm. There is no chaos, there is harmony, can be read as an understanding that the fluctuating nature of randomness is the platform from which order emerges, that much of the chaos we perceive is due to our limited perspective in the universe, unable or incapable of seeing the shape of things on certain scales of size or complexity. But it does not mean that what is being observed is necessarily disharmonious. You just can't hear the tune. A fractal mathematics version of everything happens for a reason. Do not despair over the appearance of chaos, as you have the ability to shape order out of it. There is no death, there is the Force, sounds like a literal statement that can only function within the fictional reality of the Star Wars universe. But this final Jedi Code actually addresses one of the essential points for Buddhism's existence, if not the existence of many religions. It is about learning to let go of the death fear, by understanding that upon your life's end, you will be absorbed into the life web of the Force, both by the dissolution of your physical body and the redistribution of your animating energy into the biosphere. Like all religions, this pushes into the realms of the scientifically unconfirmable, and in its fictional depiction seems to exist somewhere between reincarnation and the afterworld, or heaven, although seemingly only those who have mastered sentience via Jedi meditation are able to retain any amount of cohesive self-identity after being absorbed into the Force, which is also not entirely different from various classic Buddhist beliefs about nirvana and samsara. Now, within the lore in and around Star Wars, the space wizards, which are cited when describing the setting derisively, are not describing the Jedi. It is the Sith, Vader and Sidious, who hold the role of the space wizard, as they use the Force to create vulgar effects that disrupt reality by interrupting the natural pattern of life with their own intrusions. We will thus not be discussing the Sith version of the Force Code, as it is not relevant to Buddhism. Let us instead briefly examine the core parable being told in the Star Wars saga, in the form of the fall and redemption of Anakin Skywalker. Anakin was always doomed to fail, with strong emotional attachments and an emotionally reactive personality from the moment he was introduced. He was corrupted by his own altruism, which at its core was a belief in his own righteousness. Righteousness which bumped heads with the prequel depiction of the Jedi Order, which had become too attached to their own traditions and rules, possibly as a result of having figures like Yoda amongst them, whose extreme lifespan would serve as an anchor against broader societal changes going on externally to the Jedi Order. They had also made a mistake by accepting a government mandate of service. Keepers of the Peace is a diplomatic role, but with the authority of a deliberative state directing and authorizing their objectives, Keepers of the Peace easily become peacekeepers, which easily become police. Anakin was not entirely wrong by noticing the Jedi were corrupt in their own way, but his emotional reaction to it, his passion, led him to fail to distance himself enough to look at the bigger picture, that corruption and evil exist on a scale, and to some degree cannot be avoided entirely, and his passions left him vulnerable to the manipulations of those who would employ wizardry to enforce their will upon their surroundings. Luke, in many ways, was like his father, prone to rash emotional reactions and passionate drives, and attachments to friends and causes. But Luke was more humble in it than his father, and only bested him when Luke let go of his anger, threw his weapon away, and surrendered himself to inevitability. An act which created a final crisis of conscience in his father, whose redemptive act of saving his son from Palpatine ironically came in the form of an emotional reaction. Vader never came into balance with himself. Luke did not redeem him. Luke is his redemption. He attained mastery of the self in a most critical moment of time. Now, the purchase of Star Wars by Disney and the various films and series they have subsequently released have muddied these waters. Without the singular vision, and without proper curation of whom is permitted to contribute to the story, the modern era of Star Wars has portrayed several different philosophies, and in doing so has watered down the emergent religious nature in which Star Wars was treated by society. It's like Disney was around to buy the rights to Christianity in the year 50 AD, and then started putting out movies continuing the story of Jesus, but now focused around the granddaughter of Pontius Pilate and her adventures. Prior to the Disney acquisition of the brand, Star Wars was naturally moving towards becoming a religion. People indoctrinate their kids to watch it. They have Star Wars-themed weddings. Census data for a while there was showing consistent growth of people listing their religion as the Force or Jedi. And while that hasn't been entirely deflated, it has seemingly killed its growth potential as a common shared mythology, and not a lifestyle brand or intellectual property for content. All of which was the inevitable result of the corporatization of Star Wars as a content farm, before factoring in the near-religious schism created by The Last Jedi. Yes, I agree that Luke's death seemed unwarranted given what was shown, and that his backstory between trilogies of attempting to murder his nephew after being panicked by a clairvoyant vision does seem rather out of character. But from the moment he threw his lightsaber away after being found by Rey, his portrayal did not sit well with many, and I think this is in part the fault of the prequels and the original trilogy, for depicting older Jedi in a manner akin to a retired samurai turned monk. Luke was a monk archetype, but not a Buddhist monk. Luke's portrayal in The Last Jedi was that of a Taoist monk. So let us look a bit at Taoist principles, and see how well they relate to Star Wars, and then I'll leave it to you whether Luke's depiction as a bitter and capricious Taoist monk is appropriate for Star Wars. Taoism's central concept, the Tao, is the ultimate reality and the source of all things, often described as the Way. It's not a deity, but a force that governs the universe and its rhythms. Wu Wei. This principle emphasizes acting in accordance with the Tao, which often means effortless action and non-interference. It's about finding the natural flow of things and not forcing outcomes. Naturalness. This tenet encourages a return to the natural state of things, embracing simplicity and spontaneity. It involves living in harmony with the environment and avoiding artificiality. The three treasures are virtues that Taoists cultivate: compassion, empathy and kindness towards all beings; frugality, simplicity and moderation in one's lifestyle; and humility, a modest and unpretentious attitude, recognizing one's place in the larger order. Balance and interconnectedness. Taoism emphasizes the balance of opposing forces, yin and yang, and the interconnectedness of all things. This understanding promotes a holistic view of the universe and one's place within it. The concept of yin and yang represents complementary and opposing forces that are essential to understanding the Tao and the natural world. Spiritual immortality. Taoism explores the idea of spiritual immortality, where the individual spirit merges with the Tao at death, rather than a soul going on to a separate afterlife. Harmony with nature. A core belief is that humans should live in harmony with nature and the natural order of the universe. This includes respecting the environment and understanding the cyclical nature of life. Luke was essentially a forced purist who realized the inherent flaws of the old Jedi Order and could not see a way to bring them back without recreating the very same conditions that led to their original downfall. There is wisdom in saying the Jedi needed to end, and a new way found. But his failure was his inability to see what that new way could be, and retreating from society instead. He was afraid of his own responsibility to manage his legendary status, and Rian Johnson was clearly not up to the task of it either, giving Luke a flat, unearned death from the effort of force projection, which up to that point was not portrayed as lethal or harmful in the movie, despite previous instances of Rey and Ben projecting at each other. And so for this, among other reasons, the Disney-produced Star Wars products should not be considered to be canonical by those who seek to use Star Wars as a model of understanding Taoist principles via the Force and Buddhist teachings via the Jedi Code, stripped of the Jedi's government mandate of law enforcement and military command. Star Wars could have, and still can, serve a role as a Buddhist Taoist mythology for Western practitioners. It does not matter if fables or parables are real or works of fiction. Do you really think that Guru Rinpoche wrestled demons into submission, or that Bodhidharma sat undisturbed in the cave for 9 years without food or drink? No. These are stories, obvious stories, but the lesson within them is not to learn an accurate history. It is to achieve a greater understanding through allegorical analysis, and Star Wars has certainly not been lacking in analysis of all kind. And in my final analysis, given the information we have just reviewed, I will say a significant difference between the fictional Jedi and the real-world practice of Buddhism is that Buddhism is nowhere near as hierarchical as the Jedi were portrayed, seeing that Buddhism has multiple branches of thought that do not answer to a higher council of common authority, and that Buddhist monks are not empowered to serve as wandering lawmen, exempt from any of the laws that regulate the behavior of common citizens of the Galactic Republic, and that Buddhism and Taoism in the real world are not as bound together as the Jedi and the Force. A more Buddhist-accurate Jedi Order would be far less concerned about the Force than it would be the personal development of its members, and it would be far less exclusionary than the Jedi are portrayed in film, and there is no component of requiring an ability to bend reality via communion with a universal soul capable of influencing physics. But neither are real-world martial artists capable of the superhuman feats they are portrayed as possessing in both fable and film. Stories are allowed their embellishments. One can argue that embellishment is vital to crafting a good fictional parable, for both allegorical symbolism and to hold and entertain an audience so that they may have a chance to learn something from experiencing the story. And yes, I know the counter-argument to all of this is Joseph Campbell, hero's journey, blah blah blah. And yes, Star Wars does contain within it many aspects from different storytelling traditions for universal appeal. But the core spirituality of the saga is unquestionably a combination of Taoism and Buddhism. The Force is not at all like the Abrahamic God, and the Jedi are not Crusader knights in action or tone. In conclusion, those seeking to teach or promote Buddhist and Taoist beliefs to an American audience would be well served to utilize Star Wars as a framing device, as it is already commonly understood and does not require teaching an entirely new and foreign mythos to an audience raised under a radically different cultural context than that which Taoism and Buddhism emerged from originally. A larger portion of our society is closer to believing in Buddhism and Taoism than one may initially assume, thanks to the popularity of George Lucas's creation, regardless of whether he intended it or not.